Welcome back, Wizards, to yet another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos exploring deeper knowledge of the universe and yourself. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
And today we are joined by Suzen Aurora Renee, who is a healer, model, an artist, and an entrepreneur who studies ancient spirituality, paganism, psychology, natural law, and holistic health, among many other things, as well as an amazing partner to me and a best friend who has a lot of valuable insights to offer. So we'll probably be having her on more random episodes, here and there throughout. Many of you may recognize her from our Dark Crystal breakdown. So what we're getting into today is the 6 love languages. You might be like, well, I thought there was only 5, and we're definitely going to get into that and kind of put our own unique spin on things. But before we get into that, if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and join us. We're happy to have you, and maybe hit that like button as well. So Brian, break it down for us.
Yeah, so really the foundation of this, as you mentioned, it comes from a book known as The 5 Love Languages by an author named Gary Chapman. This is a book a lot of people might be familiar with, and if you're not, definitely, take the time to read it. It's a very valuable book. But it essentially gets into love languages, which are different forms of showing affection or, expressing care in a relationship. And that doesn't only have to be in the context of a romantic relationship, that deals with any relationship. So these are universal languages that can apply in many different contexts through many different relationships. But where the 6th love language came in was a few weeks ago. I was on Facebook and I came across an article that mentioned that the 6th love language, and had one that wasn't included in the book, but it really resonated very true for myself, like personally. But it also made a lot of sense. And then Susan, I know you had mentioned that you had came across that as well, and I had talked with Logan about this a little bit, and it made enough sense to us that we thought it would make a good episode to kind of add this in there as well. So for those of you who are familiar with the book already, there'll be some added perspective that we're going to get into here. So that's kind of the general context of what we're going to be diving into. Logan, would you like to take it from there?
Yeah, Susan, do you have anything you want to add first?
Well, I will say I studied psychology in college, and so basically my focus was on relationships and sexuality. And I think it's very interesting how a lot of people, place blame and a lot of anger towards people in their lives who don't understand how to love them. And it really is just a matter of ignorance and a lack of knowledge of these emotional archetypes that creates those lacks in our relationships, where we can't relate, where we can't connect with each other in the way that the other can receive and relate to. So I'm very excited to discuss this with people, especially those who aren't familiar with the love languages, because I can personally say that after reading that book and applying these principles to my life, my relationships completely changed.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, I love this topic as a way to kind of get into the realm of relationships on this show. This is kind of a new thing for us, and it's such a great way to introduce it, because to me, whether it's a romantic or platonic or familial type of relationship, communication is always at the bottom of it, as a foundation, because it's a relationship. You cannot relate without communication at all. So people say cliche things like honesty is the most important thing, and in a way that's true, but you can't even have honesty without communication. Like, to me, that is the very front lines of it. And this is the 5 love languages, verbal and nonverbal, that allow us to most properly connect and relate in a relationship, as well as possibly can be achieved. So basically, we're going to go through each one and discuss them individually, and beginning with quality time. This is definitely a pretty strong one, I think, for most people. I think everyone kind of has their own preferences with these of how they would rate or prioritize which ones are more important to them. And another theme that we wanted to hit on here too is just that it's so important to not only understand yourself and what your love language needs are, but then come to understand other people's and try your best to speak their love language, not just trying to give love in the same way you would like to receive it. That's sort of a projection, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, starting with quality time. Brian, would you like to open that one?
Yeah, so quality time is really kind of defined as, time that you're spending with the other person, that you're giving them your undivided or your full attention. You are fully present there. So, in the book, he mentions the example of like people like sitting on the couch together, like, just watching the TV all the time. He wouldn't classify, like he says that that's not a quality time because your attention's been going to the TV. So, and it's not that you have to be just sitting there like gazing into each other's eyes or anything like that, but it's taking the time to go for a walk together and make sure that you're talking, or going to dinner, and whatever it is that you and your spouse enjoy. It's taking the time to do that. And the same applies with your children. If you're playing with your child, but you're kind of like only halfway playing with them and you're on your phone, you're not really giving them your full attention, and it's diluted. So giving them a quality time would be giving them the full attention and actually engaging with them, in a fully present manner.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Logan said as well about quality time being important pretty much to everyone. There is ranking, and there are even quizzes you can take to find out like what your main love languages are. And most people have like two that are their most important, but quality time I think is important in any relationship. And if you really kind of zoom out and think about it, time, we're humans, and we age and time passes, and it's the one thing that we really can't get back. And so without having that quality time with each other, it can breed a lot of resentment, because especially like with a child, as they're growing up, there's those moments we have of regret of like, if we miss something, or, a milestone passes and, we don't somehow observe it or appreciate it in the way that, we wish we would, looking at it retrospectively. And so quality time, I think, is a really important one for everyone, even if it doesn't rank top on your list, because it is literally something that once it's passed, you can't get it back,
Right.
Right.
It's quality time, not quantity time. It doesn't matter how much time you're occupying the same space. If you're not being present with each other, if you're not actually connecting, then it's not meaningful. And that's really what I think it comes down to, is spending meaningful quality time together, because that's what actually is going to build strong relationships, friendships, and otherwise.
I think
Right.
that's
Oh,
sorry.
Not everybody knows.
I think that's why couples who've been together a long time put such a big focus on still going on dates too, because that is like literally you go to dinner or whatever, you have to focus on the other person. Like you said, life's not passing you by. There's not a TV on or something distracting you. And that's why that's like a big thing that people really desire later in the relationships.
It's like you're framing it as, this date night is, you're not doing that. You're not planning that for any other reason but to connect for quality time. It's not like you're running errands and paying bills and you're being together just because, you're lifing or whatever. It's an activity that's fully dedicated to that. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. One another, interesting aspect of quality time that's kind of like part of this is quality conversation. And especially in a romantic relationship, I think that becomes an extremely because as you were saying earlier, that communication, and I think even more importantly, comprehension, which is what these love languages help us do, is bring more comprehension to our what is being said in the relationship. That's the foundation. So having that quality time where you're, like I said, if you're going to dinner and having time to talk, or there's a certain time of day that you guys, you go for a walk, or, whatever, it is that you and your partner enjoy doing, that's an extremely foundational part of any relationship. And as Susan said, it doesn't, for really anyone, regardless of where your general ranking or how you rank the love languages personally, for yourself. But, this could also be one that can become an issue, I think, potentially, from a lot of different perspectives, in the sense that, you summed it up really well, Logan, when you said it's quality time, not quantity time. A lot of people will mistake that quantity time for being quality time, and like, we're always spending time together. How are we not, you know what I mean? Like, and then, the other person, if that's their love language and they're like, no, you never actually spend any like time with me or whatever. And it's like, so then that could be come a point of, bickering in the relationship. And that's the thing about these love languages that we kind of want to highlight as well, is that if they're not understood, they can actually become points of contention or resentment in a relationship, all because it's a misunderstanding. As like Susan said earlier, it's just coming from like a place of like ignorance or nescience, even of how to actually effectively communicate, with quality conversation. Someone, if they were raised in a home where that's not what people did, you didn't open up about your feelings or anything like that, that might be a lot harder for them to do. They might just think it's normal that you don't really talk that much. So then they might not be meeting their partner's needs, and they don't even realize that's what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, no, that's interesting what you said about how you can have that mindset of, well, we always spend time together. I think that will kind of that'll tie in and come full circle nicely with the sixth love language, which we'll get to later.
Mm-hmm.
But next we wanted to get into the words of affirmation. This is definitely one of my highest ranking ones personally, because for me, it's kind of like this acknowledgement, maybe subconsciously, that everything is constantly changing, including relationships and how people feel about things. And so the words of affirmation is important to me because it kind of allows me to be reassured or check in that everything is good. There's nothing kind of like brewing beneath the surface. You still feel the same way you did yesterday, kind of thing. And, again, not to be repetitive, but so many of these really work, just as well in a romantic or a platonic setting. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is an area that is really suffering in a lot of our relationships in this day and age, because we grew up in a time where it was like, don't express your emotions, boys don't cry, talk is cheap, it's all action based, all left brain, and so this is just a really important communication is what makes us more human. It's what has created a higher sense of civilization and connection. And without having those, like Logan said, without having that expression, you don't really know exactly what the other one is thinking or feeling. And yeah, sure, you can say that words don't mean anything, and that's where lying comes into play, which is something that we'll touch on. That if with all of the love languages, if your intentions aren't in the right place, if if there's any sort of ulterior motive within it, then it loses its value. It's not about the words themselves. It's about the intention and the actual individual who's giving them and their intentions behind it.
I really like that you brought up the kind of cultural aspect, especially of like our kind of generation specifically. I think there's like a lot of just the general idea of romance with like that comes out like in movies, that kind of like with that princess programming that Mark Passio talks about, or like you see like the Lifetime movies, and it has this extremely unrealistic view of romance. And I think words of affirmation is one that gets overlooked because of that. Or that, partially, that it doesn't have to be this huge show or this elaborate thing. It could be just, complimenting your spouse of like, oh, you look really nice today, or, oh, I really appreciate that you did this, or, oh, you're doing so great in your career. I'm really excited for you, and I want to keep, see you keep succeeding. Any way that you're encouraging them, even if it's a small thing, that goes so much farther than trying to make this big show of things, I think, and that's sustainable. It's those little things that add up.
Right. And it's like, it is very important to also voice your grievances and communicate things that are hurting your feelings, but you have to pair that with those words of encouragement, that positive reinforcement. Otherwise you become a nag, or an asshole, or whatever, that's just constantly criticizing and tearing down. You have to have that creative, feminine build up and encouragement element going too. I think both are equally important. It really is a masculine and feminine kind of dynamic of like useful criticism, but also, positive encouragement and that sort of thing.
Right. As far as within the words of affirmation in the book, he breaks it down into kind of a few little like subsections or kind of types of those. So we can kind of hit on each one of those really quick. The encouraging ones we just kind of hit on. Kind words, we also kind of mentioned, it's just saying something very nice to your partner. Or if it's in a work relationship, say you were a manager or something, if the people who are under you are like doing a really good job, or what, just giving them that encouragement, like, oh, you're doing a great job on that, like, I appreciate the hard work. It can apply to really any situation. Or if your child's learning something, encouraging them, like, and clapping them and cheering them on, that would be an example of that. And then with humble words, I think this one's really interesting to highlight. It's essentially could be summed up as in learning to communicate by making requests and not demands. So I think there's a lot of times, like in relationships, whenever a person can fall, or one or both people fall into the realm of they want their spouse to do something, they can do it from a place of being very demanding, especially depending on like their own disposition. But whenever you do that, you're then you're cutting off any chance for actually healthy communication right off the bat there, because you're immediately not treating that other person with respect. Excuse me. So if there is something that like you're wanting done or whatever, request, for example, like say you want your spouse to like, do the dishes or clean the house, or, whatever it may be, instead of demanding that, asking and requesting that, and then would be a lot better way to go about it. And then whenever you do notice they do it, or even if they're doing other things that are good, making sure that you're giving them those kind words or those other words of affirmation, and encouraging them, instead of just coming from this place of demanding all the time, because then, like I said, that's when the relationship then will become toxic.
And isn't that just a much more satisfying way to receive something? When you request something, you're giving them a choice. And so if they choose to give it to you, then it's not like they did it because I said so, or because I'll get angry, or because of their fear of what will happen if they don't. I'm giving them a choice, and they are choosing to love me in this way. And I think that's it's so much more satisfying to receive that than to say, oh, well, they did it because they were afraid.
Yeah, that's such a great observation. And I would say even better than that is for them to do it without you having to ask. That's what the goal, I feel, is with, say, these love languages, is when you care enough about a person to actually get to know their love languages, and then know how to give them what they desire without them even having to ask for it. And that takes time. You have to have conversations after conversations about how different things make you feel, and what what would be more ideal to you, or something like that's how we like to frame things. It's not about, it should be less about like, you did this and you should be doing that, versus this made me feel this way, and if this would have been much more ideal for me, because you're actually saying the same thing. It's just that the way you're framing it is coming from a place of desiring to connect rather than to like dominate and control, basically, which is the exact opposite of what love actually is, which is freedom.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, with quality time and with words of affirmation, because as Brian said, quality conversation is a part of quality time. If you think about it, we're getting to know each other. That's what you're doing. Like, let's say the quality time that that individual or that couple that spends all their time together. Well, in our society, a lot of that is you go to work all day. So, you know, maybe if you're lucky, you work together and you get to, you know, do whatever it is you're doing together. But otherwise, you're spending your evenings, you know, at home, cooking dinner, taking care of kids, doing homework. It's very standardized, the kind of experiences and different sides of your partner that you get to see. So when you do things like Logan and I did last night, we went to a concert and we were able to get to know each other in that setting of enjoying music and being in a social setting. And, you know, that was a different side of each other that we saw. And so with quality time and with words of affirmation, you're literally getting to know your partner better through these things. And so as Logan just pointed out, with time, eventually, if you're paying attention and you truly are loving the other, and, you know, by the true definition of the word, then you will eventually not have to work so hard to love them the way that they want to be loved, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. And it's like the challenging part is finding that balance. I think that's one of the kind of the most testing aspects of, especially like a long-term relationship, is finding the balance between what you're wanting to give to make them fulfilled versus still honoring, not compromising your own self too much to the point that you feel, you know, compromised, like you're stretching too far for your own, like, sincere showing up, as, you know, honestly, basically.
Right, pouring from an empty cup.
Right, that too.
Yeah, one, I think, you know, one of the, you know, with words of affirmation, one of the things we can observe is on the flip side, in a relationship, what's also very detrimental is when you're tearing another down, or you're insulting the person, or telling them like, oh, you're not doing that, or you're a failure of some sort, or you know, whatever it may be. Especially if, say, that person's love language is words of affirmation, which that's probably one of the biggest ones, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Then that, you know, that's even more detrimental to that kind of person, because that's where they operate from. So if they're expecting someone to lift them up, like, and to encourage them as a way of showing love, if you're then tearing them down, they'll take that as the exact opposite of being loved, and then feel not loved at all, and then distance continues to grow, so then communication will become less and less and less, and the relationship will deteriorate from there.
Right. I mean, I've heard lots of conversations about people's very toxic relationships, and I've heard many times of cases where these narcissistic partners or whatever, they're learning their love languages and then purposefully starving them to better control them. I mean, so that just stresses the importance of really, like, being careful with who you're trusting, and who you're letting in that close, basically. But, you know,
that's exactly what I was thinking too, is that all these love languages have a shadow side.
Yeah.
You know, like words of affirmation would be words of defamation, you know, like,
right.
And I still remember some of the things that people have said to me in my relationships, you know, like, I still haven't forgotten. That's a really hard one to heal from.
Yeah. And obviously lying too, because then if once that trust has been damaged, then how can you even believe it when they're telling you what you want to hear? Like, is it even sincere? That's what, yeah. But obviously the whole narcissism thing, that's a whole other topic we plan on getting into separate episodes with. Brian, did you have something?
No, other than that, that's the same thing I was going to mention, is like with the narcissism, like, you know, that's why we're laying you know, as we like to do, we like to lay foundations of certain episodes and then build off of them. So eventually we'll be getting into kind of those topics of, you know, narcissism and codependency and things like that in a future episode. So, you know, keep an eye out for that, you know, and, you know, be sure to subscribe. That way you get notified, you know, every week whenever it comes up, and then, you know, you keep an eye out for that episode. The next love language is known as acts of service. You know, so this is where you're taking the time to do something that, you know, your spouse appreciates. An example would be like, you know, if your spouse is wanting some help, like around the house, like cleaning or something, and you're like, they enjoy you doing the dishes or taking out the trash, or maybe they don't enjoy doing laundry, so like you do that or whatever. That would be something that they would appreciate. Like, and even though it may not be something that you enjoy, you're taking the time to then kind of do that for them and like show up and be present, that like, hey, I would like to help you out with this, and I know you appreciate this. So and that could be a variety of things. Again, this is all of these things come down, there's the general idea of the language, but everybody kind of expresses them in their own way, and in many different variations. Like what might be a compliment for one person, another might not resonate with another person as much, or everybody appreciates their own things being done. So this is why, again, that communication is so foundational, and taking the time to get to know the people that you're in relationships with, no matter what the context of that relationship is. That's really needed to be able to figure out exactly what the best way to communicate with them.
Yeah, that's so funny that you said that, because actually me and Susan kind of, she had expressed trash is just one thing that I just don't like to do. And so I agreed, that I was like, I'll make sure you don't have to touch the trash. I don't mind it, so I'll do it. And we balance each other out in different ways, and kind of step up, and kind of, because it's an act of care, of just like, I obviously don't love trash or anything. It's just that I want to, offer that for her because I can, and I don't mind it. But yeah, it can be, having a meal hot and ready cooked. We do this for each other a lot. We'll be out driving Uber, and we'll come home and there'll be dinner waiting for you. Or, just picking up some milk while you were on your way home, or doing favors and things like that. Or even, it could even be like building something or creating something, which that could be like in the realm of the gifts love language, which we'll get to soon. But I think the difference there being that it's something that's created, that you made, rather than just buying it at a store. There's a lot more care. It's a gift that was an act of service as well. It's like, a two for there. So that's pretty interesting.
Right. I think it's
sorry,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, with this one, I think that it's important to differentiate between an act of service and an act of just obligation, because maybe obligation's not the right word, but let's say something that is just everyone's job, like in a family dynamic. It's not really the mom's job or the dad's job to, do specific chores or do the dishes, or, even with the trash, it shouldn't necessarily be just Logan's job to take out the trash. So because it's something that we would both normally be doing, it would be both of our responsibility, but he has taken it on completely. It goes beyond him just doing something for me that's actually just for, we even we'll have to check in with each other, because we're constantly thanking each other for doing the dishes. And it's funny because they're just our dishes, we're just supposed to do them, but we appreciate so much when the other one does it, because nobody really likes doing the dishes, right?
And it's words of affirmation.
Yes, that too.
You can be appreciating them doing the dishes, but if you're not saying it, they don't know that you're appreciating it. So it's important to express that often.
Right. Or if you on the flip side of that, with kind of the shadow side of Susan talked about, these has, for example, say a person was like to try to clean house, and they did the dishes, and that spouse then criticize the way that they did it, or something like that. That would then make that person probably not want to do those acts of service and things like that. So, again, these are interesting in the way they play out. But I also think that, and you kind of mentioned on this a little bit here, Susan, and this ties in what we talked about earlier, is the idea of request versus demands. So, a lot of these are like general household things, that one you hear a lot about is, a girlfriend or wife might ask, like, I wish whenever you got home from work, you would help out with the kids more, or you'd help out with the house more, or whatever it may be. But if it's coming from a place of nagging, or demanding, then the other spouse is not going to then respond to that as well. So then again, reframing the way you're going about wanting things done, like saying, I would really appreciate if you could help me out doing this, you know, is a lot better way to approach it rather than just saying, you need to get this done. Or, if the person doesn't do it, then you just kind of berating them for it, or whatever that may be, and again, depending on each person's disposition, if that's, if acts of service is like one of their love languages, like Logan mentioned earlier, sometimes what we do is we get caught in the projection of our own love language, and we'll be trying to express love in the way that we want to feel that love, but that's just our own projection. Well, but that may not actually be our spouse's love language. So then what will happen is that other spouse, your spouse will feel unloved because their love language is not being met, but then you feel like you're giving all of yourself and then being told that it's not good enough. So, then, that's why it's so important to not only understand how like you are operating, but how, the other person in the relationship is operating as well. So you have both of those pieces of information to, filter into how you're making your decisions.
Yeah, that's one that I struggle with a lot, is if I'm not getting the criticism paired with the words of affirmation, I start kind of getting caught in this this negative thought pattern of I'm a failure, this kind of like catastrophic extreme take, like I'm just like, I can't do anything right, or why do I even bother, that sort of thing, because it's not highlighting both. It's just, too focused on the negative. It's something that I'm working on, but I can acknowledge that I have weak areas that I want to work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I think, another way this plays out in the regards to requests for demands is how you're treating your spouse. And there's a section in the book that, he calls a doormat or lover. I think that's a really good way to summarize like how you're actually, are you treating the other person like a doormat, like something that you're just walking all over and, just kind of using and demanding things of? And not really appreciating or valuing, or are you actually treating that person as someone that you love and you value and you care about? Because those are two very different dynamics. And if it's someone that you love and you care about and respect, or that's what you say you do, treating them with enough respect to learn how to communicate and request things and to appreciate them rather than tearing them down. Like that's the exact opposite of what love is, and that's extremely toxic if that's what's happening, and those are situations you shouldn't stay in.
Yeah, that's one that I've even have struggled with in my healthier relationships, and I think that, not to make an excuse for people that struggle with that, but I think from my own personal perspective, I can say that part of that comes from having asked for things in the past and then being constantly told no. And it kind of like a child, if they keep asking like for a piece of candy and you keep saying no, what are they going to do? Eventually they're going to sneak in, and when you're not looking, they're going to go get the piece of candy, right? So it's like having that not be received, and having requests denied or completely ignored, by people who weren't wanting to speak my love languages, created this kind of wiring in my brain where I felt like, well, I'll just skip the asking part and I'll just tell them what I want instead of asking for it. And, like we talked about earlier, that takes away choice, that takes away the ability to choose to love you. And then they're just acting out of fear at that point. And that's not love. It's the opposite. So.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point for sure. Yeah. And again, if we can see as there's a general theme on our show, we like to highlight whenever we see some kind of toxic behavior, no matter what it is, you can see that it's out of alignment with natural law. It's not honoring sovereignty or honoring free will. The healthy relationship, like being able to speak people's love languages, what you notice with that, like when you're requesting something instead of demanding it, you're honoring someone's free will. Like that is a behavior that's in alignment with cosmic law. And that's why it, ends up, it's a healthy behavior. It creates positive results. Whereas if you do the opposite, it creates that toxic relationship that eventually, it becomes that hard teacher, or that hard lesson that, sometimes it takes a long time to get out of or to, escape, especially depending on, different variables and things. But those are also very, very good teachers in order to go forward. So even if you are in some kind of a relationship where you're experiencing a lot of these things, or even if a person is kind of like manipulating you, like Logan mentioned, like narcissistic people, like knowing people's love languages and using that as manipulation. Even if that's something you've experienced, you can then take that as a learning process, that whenever you move into your future relationships, then you can be a lot more aware of that, because then you will know through personal experience the effect of those not being met. So again, that cosmic law, that apophatic learning is still here and involved with these.
Mm-hmm. So the next one is physical touch, and this is definitely my other top two, if you will, in terms of my personal love languages. And it's such a beautiful one, because it's sort of the nonverbal expression of love. It's something as subtle as just putting your hand on their back, or holding their hand, or hugging them, if they're crying or something like that. Like, there's all sorts of, in fact, we kind of fleshed out a few different types. There's like the encouraging / comforting. So if they're crying, just holding space and just kind of like physically showing them that you're there for them, even though that there's no words that would take their pain away. Just that hand there, or that hug or embrace or whatever, it says more than 1,000 words in those types of situations. It really means a lot, especially being that it's one of my main ones. Then there's healing. So it could be something like actually giving your partner a back massage, because that they really love that, or they have a job that's hard on their back or something like that. Like, that's such a beautiful act of care that you can do for someone, and learning exactly what it is that they like. And then obviously there's the sexual end of things, which is extremely important. I think every person should be sexually active, just to maintain their hormonal balance and their emotional well-being and mental clarity. There's a lot of medicine in that sexual release. But of course, this just as much applies platonically, just with a handshake or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I really like about this one is that it is the most tangible love language. We can actually scientifically measure the importance of physical touch. Infants who are, struggling, who don't have access to physical touch, they have people now that will literally just go hold newborn babies or premature babies, in nurseries, because being that skin to skin contact. I mean, I've even read stories about babies who didn't look like they were going to survive, and they put them skin to skin on the mother, and they actually ended up bouncing back from the brink of death. And, also as, adults, even, that being starved of physical touch can actually create physical health problems. We actually physically need to have this skin to skin contact, this, like you said, nonverbal communication with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's interesting to think how it is like a very intrinsic human need. So it's almost like if a person has a problem with physical touch, it's a problem with them. There's something that's creating a blockage or a fear or resistance to that. But that if that were healed, they would actually desire that, because, like you said yourself, and it is scientifically proven that infants will die if they don't get if they're completely never touched. That pretty much says all you need to know about that it is so very important. Obviously, people are more cuddly than others, but even within that, it is a universally intrinsic human need for sure.
Well, and one of the very interesting things about physical touch, and I think is a reason for a lot of that, is that physical touch is the only sense that actually isn't isolated to just one area of the body. We have nerve receptors all over our body, that all respond and then send a response to our brain, which then has a chemical release. So it's kind of very interesting to look at it in that sense, that it's the only one of the 5 senses that does that. So and it's very important for a lot of people. That's also happens to be one that's really big for like me myself, or sorry. That's one that's really big for me, as one of my love languages is, physical touch, or, just, and it, even if it's like a simple thing, like, just a touch on the shoulder or something like that, it doesn't have to always just be obviously sexual or anything, which I think a lot of people can maybe get confused with that. And especially in the context of a romantic relationship, like they think that's the only way to show physical affection, and that's far from the case. There's many different forms of being able to do that.
Yeah, isn't it interesting though how there's such a a gradient within the nervous system for platonic versus sexual, or even the context itself. It could be something like a Joe Biden neck grab, that it's not like an erogenous zone, but there's just something kind of like predatorial about it, and or like how close to a a private area. There's no line is what I'm saying, it's a gradient there, but it's just really interesting. And then you can look at like the cultural diversity of touching, the norms, and how some cultures are just very Italians, they'll kiss each other on the cheek and hug and all this kind of stuff, and other ones, especially I'd say Asian countries and even Western countries like UK and America, it's way more standoffish, and people will actually get really offended if you touch them sometimes. It's just really interesting, the psychology behind that.
Mm-hmm. Well, another kind of interesting aspect of that is how physical touch actually, it's such a common thing through all different cultures, no matter what the culture is, like not only in the context of like romantic relationships, but a good example would be here in the West, we can look at the handshake. If you see like a couple men give each other a handshake, there's the general indication that things are cordial, or there's mm-hmm. some kind, it's okay. But if two people are then in a situation where they refuse to shake each other's hands, that has then indicated something is not okay. There's some kind of conflict going on, and that's indicated by a simple physical touch, So, I think that's an interesting thing to observe as well.
Yeah, the body language kind of weaves into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even
absolutely.
How in the Middle East, it's like normal for dudes to just literally walk down the street holding hands, and it doesn't mean they're gay or anything like that. It's just like, it's the same thing objectively, but it's just amazing to see just how much the mindset or the perception, can dictate.
Right.
Yeah. And then the shadow side of this would be, physical harm and abuse, and how detrimental that is, how you can literally turn this on someone and literally take their lives if, you wish to. But that would be the shadow side of physical touch, is using that, that form of communication to harm someone else, to control them.
Right. Either violently or like sexually assaulting, that sort of thing.
Right. One, that's, speaking like of this in the context of like other relationships, imagine a child whose, love language is physical touch, but instead of getting love or encouragement, the only thing they're getting is physical abuse. So like, that's going to be extremely detrimental to them. And especially if you pair that with with words of safe, like their love languages were like physical touch and words of affirmation, but instead they're getting physical abuse and they're getting torn down, they're going to feel very neglected, very not loved. So, as a parent, and that's one of the things with this this book, there's actually a series, there's a 5 love languages for women and men and children and teenagers. There's quite a few different ones that you can go look at, and that are kind of all specifically geared for the different situations or different relationships. But you can see how they apply to all of them, and again, they could definitely be something that is it's a sensitive point. It could be an area where a person is either very fulfilled or they feel left very empty, and hurt. So
yeah, dude, I wanted to riff on something you said there. I got a big ping, because if you think about it, violence is still a form of physical touch. It's all a spectrum of like very gentle, soft, and caring type touch to, punching and scratching and things like that. But if you think about it too, when you're a child, you're being shown what love is by your parents. So if your parents are physically abusive, you are probably acting out as an expression of, this is how we like people treat each other who love each other. and are showing that same violence through the cycle of abuse to others. But to them, they are speaking their love language in a very like twisted way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and from what I've studied, actually, that can create kind of schisms in your desire for your love languages as an adult. Like people who were spanked a lot as children tend to like BDSM, and they're actually, you know, interested in forms of physical touch that are to other people what seem harmful
Taboo.
is actually quite enjoyable for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, it's very interesting how powerful these love languages are in regards to the context of our programming, of how, as we're raised, you know, how we're experiencing and being and shown what love is. That can actually be very helpful for us if it's done in a correct way, but it could also be very detrimental and lead to potentially harmful behaviors later. Not to say that anything within like the realm of BDSM is like harmful or anything like that, but there are those extremes within that culture that some, you know, people very much do go to the extreme of actual harm. You know, again, it's a huge gradient of, you know, where people can fall with that. Another thing I want to mention here with physical touch is how in the specifically regards to a romantic relationship, how cheating or something could actually be something that could be very detrimental to any relationship, but especially in the context of if one of those people or both, their love language is physical touch. So if there was a situation in a relationship where that couple wasn't really, they never had any physical touch, like they never kissed each other or had sex or did anything like that, but then, you know, a spouse was to find out that that other one went and cheated on them, they would take that not only as a lack of love for themselves because they're not receiving that, but that their spouse is then giving that love that they're desiring to someone else. So it would be even, you know, kind of even more detrimental to a person and a lot harder to heal from. So that's why some people have, you know, a lot harder time moving on from those kind of things. And it takes a long time to process because, you know, to them, it was like a bomb going off, you know, like in their heart, you know, would just really blast them apart. So, you know, again, so it's so important to know what these are and how your partner functions.
Yeah,
Right.
and I just realized that just like with the reflection of, you know, physical touch being the very positive biological experience, it actually, the flip side is the same because, you know, physical harm and abuse can cause PTSD and actually cause biological, you know, malfunctions, for lack of a better way to put it. So it's interesting to see how that plays out on both sides the same way.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to look at how each one of these almost has a little bit of a masculine or a feminine side to them. In other words, not that men don't appreciate physical touch, but it tends to be more a feminine thing that they desire that, or the words of affirmation. Oftentimes men aren't as touchy-feely or expressive in that way, but things like acts of service or gifts, which is the next one we're getting into, they're a lot more like masculine, action oriented, like you said, Susan, or like gift is kind of like stepping into that provider role of I got these things for you, I foraged and I gathered the resources to get this thing, from the ancient mentality there. But cultures, all sorts of cultures have always had intrinsic, gift giving traditions, especially like the Norse traditions. It was almost expected that even if you had a guest in your home, that you were going to gabo, you were going to offer them something. I think that's a really beautiful thing to portray the true spirit of humanity. We all desire to give and receive love above all else. And I think anything else that is harmful is only an act out of pain from not having that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's lower on my list as far as what I want to receive or what I value receiving as a love language, simply because it's more of a materialistic thing. I love having nice things, but when it comes to a relationship, obviously the material side of things is a little bit less less important. So, I would probably start to wonder if, like Susan never bought me anything, I'd be like, what's up with this? But I'm not going to come to her and be like, well, I haven't gotten any gifts this week. Like, what's up with that? It's kind of just, it's just kind of neutral in my book, I guess you could say. It's nice, but.
Right. Well, and I like that you mentioned, this is something from like an anthropological perspective. You can see it resonates through many different cultures, like even cultures that are totally unrelated, especially in the context to romantic relationships or courtship. Gift giving is something that's very inherent to us as human beings, as well as like physical touch. That's another one, and any kind of trait or human behavior that exists throughout many different cultures. That's obviously something very, interesting to look at, because obviously it's something that is very intrinsic to us fundamentally as human beings. And, a couple of these love languages, or, more than a few of them definitely, I would say fall under that category. A very good way to look at a gift here, though, is it's a visual symbol of love. Like we can see that, symbols have emotional context or meaning to them, like what maybe something, because you got a special gift given to you by like a friend or a spouse, that might be something that's very valuable to you. Like it's you treat it as like a treasure. Whereas if another person who didn't know what it was, they didn't know the story behind it or anything like that, it's just going to seem like another object or, whatever have you.
It has sentimental value that someone else wouldn't understand or wouldn't know the level.
Right. Yeah. So gifts are really like a visual representation that's infused with that sentimental value that you're then sharing with someone that you care about. It's almost like you're pouring part of yourself, and your life force energy into that, and giving that to them.
Those gifts can actually become, like almost like a piece of art, like my son, makes me something small out of paper and, tinfoil, and it's, nothing really special. Somebody might walk in and see it and be like, why does she have that? But to me, it's now this piece of art. It's this symbol of time and energy that he spent, and then, giving away something that, he could have kept for himself. And it's interesting that Logan said that, gifts isn't one of his main love languages. And we talked about gifts being a more, masculine thing. And a lot of men that I've talked to about the love languages have said the same thing, that gifts is very low. And I think that you were onto something, Logan, with the fact that it's kind of a providing aspect. And if you look at like even our culture, like Valentine's Day, for example, women aren't really going out and buying teddy bears and roses and chocolates. And on anniversaries, it's like kind of a big deal for the man to like get all these gifts for the woman. And there's this, cultural expectation of that. And I think that men happily kind of fall into that role because they don't care as much about it. They want you to put the lingerie on at the end of the night and give the physical touch, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that there's a balance within these in the masculine and feminine. And I'm really interested to think about that more.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, for speaking for myself, the one thing that I really like about gift giving is like what you were saying, Susan, about, first of all, it almost is kind of an act of service, because even if you didn't make the gift yourself, you still spent the time working to earn the money that it costs to actually buy that thing and then give it away. It's a sacrifice of sorts, if you want to look at it from the pagan perspective as well. And but I think my favorite thing about gift giving is just knowing that I can buy you something that you'll use, and then you'll think about me every time you see it, whether it's just a trinket or like your coffee mug that I got for Christmas. You use that thing every day, and it just makes me happy seeing that. You know what I mean?
And I feel the same way using it,
Right.
Like Brian said, it's a physical representation of the love, something tangible that you can touch and look at. And, it's a reminder, even if the words are not there and the touch is not there, especially if you're like in a long distance relationship, for example. That's how our relationship started. And there were certain items that I had of yours that, you know, even if you weren't here, it had that sense of your energy within it. You know, it was like a little piece of you was here.
Yeah. Like Brian said, it's like you imbue your psychic energy into that object in a way. So it kind of holds that charge.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, what I was going to say though is in regards to what you were hitting on, Susan, I think why a lot of men in regards to their love language, and you know, this is just as kind of a general rule, why that, you know, they're really good at stepping into the role of giving gifts, because men tend to, that's a very masculine thing of stepping into that role as a provider, but receiving gifts isn't as big for them, because like that's, you know, a lot, there's that general stigma or just that kind of general masculine nature to want to be that provider, but you're not really expecting to be provided for. So like receiving that is not as important for a lot of other men. They would rather have the words of affirmation of, oh, I really appreciate that you did that, like, or you know, things like that. So that is kind of interesting to note, you know. And for anyone who has like taken the test, or you know, you can find a free test online, you know, take it. And you know, what are yours? Is what we're saying resonating with you guys? Like, let us, you know in the comments below what you guys are thinking. But another really important form of gift giving is the gift of self. Just taking the time to be there and to appreciate a person, or to do things with them that they enjoy. That's really, you know, the greatest gift of all, is being able to actually like give yourself in a relationship, or like as a parent, you know, take the time to take your child to the park and play with them, or you know, whatever it may be. A gift doesn't have to be something that you go and buy. Just showing up and being present and showing love as a human being is a gift in itself.
That's a really great point, because you know, a gift is simply something that you give, that you value. So really, any of these can be a gift. Like giving.
That's what I was gonna say.
Giving a back massage is a gift. It's just that they kind of, you know, focused on this one separate, more in the context of like, well, like we said, the materialistic, you know, you know, chocolates and roses, or just a coffee mug, that sort of thing, you know, a physical item. But yeah, definitely all of these are gifts, because it's a form of sacrifice. And so again, those of you who've read this book, or you're familiar with the concept, those are the 5 sort of staple standard love languages. But as Brian and Susan, you know, they both came across an article that sort of proposed a 6th love language, which is distance. And we all thought that this was a very, you know, insightful, profound kind of addition to this concept. And so what that means is, it's almost kind of, you could say, the other side of the quality time. And just because you're spending a lot of physical time together doesn't mean that's quality time. But oftentimes I'd say that there's 2 solutions to that. If you're together all the time, but you're always just like, you know, arguing, or just like running errands and paying bills and doing adult life stuff, you know, that's not fun, it's not inspiring. You could spend more quality time, but also just taking a break from each other, spending some time apart is sort of that. For me, okay, I could put it down like this. So as a musician, if I'm going to play a good guitar solo, you'd think, well, if I just shred a whole bunch, like everybody will be super impressed with my skills and they'll love it. But actually, most people, myself included, find that kind of annoying. Just this constant barrage of just like, look what I can do, blah 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 blah. But if I pepper in spaces in there, I'm saying just as much with the silence as I am with the notes. That the space between gives meaning to what is. It's the 1 and 0 sort of masculine and feminine, you know, it is and isn't, or you know, that sort of thing, in and out. It's like the battery, you know.
Well, yeah, and this. Sorry.
Go ahead, Brian.
This was one that, like, whenever I saw it, like, it really resonated for me personally, because if there was one that I would say would be mine most, it's distance. You know, like I'm a Pisces ascendant. You know, I have a lot of 8th house energy, where I need time to go into the other world, or to think and kind of like delve into the shadow. That's just kind of my disposition as a person. And if I I don't get to express that, or if I don't get to create content or do my work, it can lead to a lot of frustration. Uh, so, and distance can be something as, it doesn't even necessarily have to be like a physical distance so much. It can be, but for example, like if, for me, a big one is like, I work at home or whatever, I have some office. So something I really appreciate or whatever is if I'm given time to like, where my son's mother can like, watch him and, take him to go play or something, like whenever I'm doing my work. So I don't get interrupted, because I'm with my disposition, I really enjoy my work a lot. That's kind of my release. That's like where I express, and that's my also kind of alone time. That's where I get to think and do what I need to. So if that's then not honored, that then leaves me, not appreciated or respected, kind of a thing. But that's where I think something, with distance can kind of play, as Logan mentioned, it can play back and forth with the quality time. So for, I think a good example would be like, say you have two people, one of their love languages is quality time, and the other person is distance. Well, you could see how that could potentially then become a conflict if healthy boundaries aren't clearly communicated. Because the person that wants distance, if they're feeling like they're always with the other person, like, and they might be mistaking quantity time for quality time, but then the person who is wanting quality time is then feeling like, oh, we never actually have any quality time. So then they're kind of like clinging and not giving the other person distance. Then the other person's going to feel smothered, and they can kind of like work against each other in that sense. So, if you were, in a relationship where this was like the dynamic, being aware of that is the first step to the solution. So then you would just have to have a clear kind of communication of like what those boundaries are. So like in my personal example, I really like having my like set work time, like where I'm not going to get interrupted, and I can just do what I need to do. And then if I get that, it's a lot easier for me to then later on go give quality time, which isn't as big of a thing for me. Like it's a lot easier for me to provide that as a father if I am getting fulfilled, like in the sense that I still have the time to go think beyond and think into deeper things, because there's like only like so much Curious George or stuff like that that I can kind of take. Sometimes
It's like
as an adult, you need that escape to do the things that you enjoy as well.
It's like your hierarchy of needs, basically. Like you can't
Right.
give this other thing until you get what you need to fill your own cup first, and then you're good.
Because then you're just
Exactly.
drained all the time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that, this one is the one that really feeds into the self-development. That all these other ones are about kind of developing the relationship, but that that's one side of it that is weak, and that's why these books are so valuable. But it kind of leaves out the other aspect of that, which is distance. To me is one of the most selfless love languages, right? Because quality time, you get something out of it too. You enjoy it, even the words of affirmation, you're hearing thank you, that's so sweet, they're kind of, there's an interaction in that, and so you're kind of getting something out of it too. But distance is one of those things that it is completely about the individual, and that's half or maybe even more of the success of a relationship has to do with the two individuals, and so we have these 5 languages that help develop the relationship, and the 6th one, distance, being more selfless and more about just giving that other person the space to be who they are. Because depending on the kind of personality you have, this actually could be more detrimental to certain people than others. Because some people, if they don't get time to themselves, they kind of start to, mimic or turn into. I mean, we all kind of do it, right? They say you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if you don't ever have any time to yourself, then you're going to lose your sense of who you are as an individual, what it is that you need, what it is that you feel. Because if you're constantly berated by expectations and other people's feelings, and you never get any time alone to process and to really assess who you are when no one else is watching, or when no one else is influencing you, or, you know, pushing you, or, you know, just in your space at all, just affecting your energy field, then you're not going to be able to even accomplish, you know, the other love languages without this one.
Yeah, that's
I love that you brought that up. That's such a good point. Oh, I'm sorry, Logan.
No, I totally agree. That's so insightful. Just over here, like, yep, that's my girl. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. She's pretty awesome. You got a good one.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant.
You
and
guys.
Definitely, you know, I'm so glad that you brought that into the conversation, because, you know, I say this, you know, between us sometimes about how it's important to always remember that we're individuals who are in a relationship, not the other way around. Like we have to keep our autonomy intact, otherwise it goes toxic really fast. And so allowing that space to be your own person sometimes is so important to developing yourself as an individual, like you said, and obviously avoiding that sort of codependent magnetic situation that you could get sucked into very easily. So yeah, I mean, you know, and Susan, you mentioned that we started out long distance. I was a truck driver. We met on Facebook, and for the first 9 months of our relationship, we only got to hang out, you know, a couple of days a month. Otherwise, we were on video calls and phone calls. And so there was the distance, but quality time was still present, because we were creating space to connect, but yet we weren't physically like in the same place, and we weren't able to do things like express physical touch and things like that. So that really put an interesting experience in context to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, we would always relate that to like losing one of the senses. That's how I would always describe it to people. They'd be like, isn't that hard? And I'm like, it's kind of like when you lose one of your senses, all of the other ones become more heightened. Mm-hmm. So because, you know, physical touch and some of these other love languages were, you know, being dampened, our other ones were, you know, being amplified.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it really is about respecting each other's preferences and, you know, your lifestyle needs, such as, like Brian mentioned, undisturbed work time, or a nature getaway. Like, I just need to go be in the woods by myself for a day or something like that, or go on a motorcycle trip, or, you know, or getting guy or girl time, like just hanging out with your pals without your significant other around. I think that's really healthy, and it is conducive to being a well-rounded individual who is in a healthy relationship, and not just, you know, this idea of spending all the, you know, if you don't spend every moment together, you don't love each other enough or something. That's just codependence, you know, in a fancy, with a fancy bow. So it's important to, stay grounded with that, and honor your space, so that, like you said, Susan, to process your own feelings, to have your own thoughts about things without always being influenced by everyone else's agenda, no matter if they're, you know, a good person or a bad person. It's still important to kind of just like have your own thing undisturbed by anyone else. That's why nature is such a wonderful sanctuary, because it sort of just holds space for you and feeds you that energy, the, you know, the resonance of nature and all that sort of thing, but in your solitude as well.
Yeah, one, you know, I think distance really is, I think, a key for actually having a healthy relationship. If you end up in a relationship with a person who is extremely controlling, and they think that, say, like their love language is quality time, but they're coming from a toxic place, so then they're trying to just totally cling onto the person all the time. And then if they're afraid of that, you know, they might have trust issues or something. So they might be afraid if that person is out of their sight, that they're off, you know, cheating or whatever. You can see that how that distance then could become very starved. And I think, you know, Susan, you mentioned that one of the things about distance is it's very selfless, but at the same time, I do think that you could get something out of it in the context of, like, for example, like letting your spouse go on like a weekend out in nature, or to go for a trip, or to go, you know, have their guys' night or the girls' night. You know that ultimately, like, even though you're giving them that space, they're going to come back the better for it, and then be able to be more present, so that the time you are spending with them, the quality of that time is then improving. So exactly. If you're a person who your love language is quality time, you know, one of the best things you could do, especially if your partner's love language is distance, is let them have that distance, because then they're going to be able to share that quality time with you. But if you're always, have your claws dug into them, they're going to feel smothered, especially like I'm a person that's like very much like that, like astrologically, like with my placements, if I feel like I'm chained down or smothered, it makes me, I get very unhappy, and it's not very pleasant to go through. And then I only want to pull away. So then the last thing I want to do is go spend more time, especially,
Right.
that you had a relation, with the relationship with my son's mother, as you both know, has, like a few years of being very rough, where a lot of these things were kind of at play here, and I was experiencing them. But has been very much a learning process to go through, because I learned a lot about myself through this, and that's also something that I think is very interesting, that I'm going to kind of start doing myself, is looking at the comparisons of the love languages to astrological dispositions. So if anyone is kind of interested in that side of things and would maybe to have a private message with me, or share their chart, and if they happen to know their love language as well, and kind of like put that information out there for educational purposes, they can private message me or whatever too.
Or
That's
email us.
something I would, that's something I would be very, very interested in, kind of like starting a study in regards.
Yeah, so it's interesting in hearing you talk about, Brian, distance being one of the most important love languages for you. Something, I realized when you were talking about that, was it really is the most difficult, I think, too, love language to give, just in our society. For a lot of people, I hear a lot of my friends, whenever we're talking about their relationships, struggling with that. And I even struggle with this one with my son now. He's 12. And, as Logan has been observing, over the last few months, he's been kind of coming into his own, and it's been difficult for me not to just be like, come in here and hang out with me, and, not give him his distance and his time. And I think specifically, a lot of women do have difficulty with this one. And it does have, I know for me personally, in the past, when I had issues giving distance to my partners, it was always based in the fear of past experiences, where I'd given someone distance, and then they had done something hurtful with that distance. Maybe not necessarily to the extent of cheating, but, maybe go out with your guy friends and then you drive home drunk. Of course, I'm going to not be as excited the next time you go out with your guy friends. And so having that trust broken within that space makes it even harder to give it. But when you have someone who is using that space for personal, growth and all of that, like Brian said, it's very important to be able to have the ability to do that, because you're going to come back better for it. It's just kind of like having a Mother's Day out, or, just having your weekend off where you get to recharge, and if you don't ever have any time alone, then you're not going to be fully recharged when you come back. And like I talked about, the empty cup, if you are able to fill your cup, you have more to pour into others.
Exactly.
Right. One, I think, I like that you brought this up, because parenthood would be another great example of, I know, Susan, you can relate to this, of needing distance, like especially like when they're young, and they're taught, like my son's too, like he runs wild, like he wears me out. Parents very much, like if they go like on and on and on, and they never have a break, they just get worn out, like to where you just feel like you don't have anything left to give. So it's very, very important to get those breaks, whether even if it's just a grandparent coming to like pick them up and watch like for a few hours. As like a parent, that can just seem like the most amazing thing, even if all you do is like take a nap during it, or like just try to get like other chores done, or things like that. But that that's a form of distance. So even to be the best parent you can be, that you need to have those spaces of distance in between, and that makes you miss your kid after they're like gone for a few hours, and you're like, okay, I've had like a little break, like I've recharged a little bit, like now I'm kind of like missing my little munchkin and wondering like, what they're up to. And I think that's really important, because especially in parenthood, again, I've seen lots of parents who, they might be a single parent, and they live somewhere that they don't have family around, so they just don't have that option to ever get that break. That creates a person who feels very not only just unloved, but just empty and drained, because they're always trying to give, but they're not receiving what they're needing to for their own emotional health. And as you mentioned, Susan, distance is the one of all these that it really is about you being able to maintain your own emotional health, like, because you have the time to go think and do things like that.
Mm-hmm. So many great points brought up here. And, so really, like, if you haven't yet, take the test, find out what are your love languages, and let us know in the comments, what is your most important or valued love language. Brian, I love your t-shirt. You want to show us that there?
Yeah, we do have a nice Wizard Factory t-shirt here.
Yeah, and you can find that Empower, Inspire, Encourage in the logo. And that is $25 on thewizardfactory.com on the merch page. So check that out. Also, regarding this topic, we do personal adaptive consultations. So we'd love to talk to you about, relationships. If you've got some problems going on, maybe we'd love to help you. So message us below with that. And that's going to conclude today's episode. If you have not yet, please check out our initiation package. We put together a video series totally free, teaching you some very practical spiritual tools that you can start using right away to start building a relationship with yourself, the universe, the runes. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to our channel. We'd love to have our channel keep growing and keep spreading the good message of self-empowerment. So that's all the time we have today, but thank you so much. And again, be empowered, be inspired, and be encouraged.